So the blurb is awareness and freedom, and it says, with great power comes great responsibility. Peter Parker, which of course, as all true Spider-Man fans know, is a misquote. It was actually Ben Parker, his uncle. But when I tried to convince the woman doing the blurb of this, she thought that nobody would know what I was talking about. So she wanted to have Peter Parker there in the hope that some people would know what that meant. Yep. So the blurb is, with great power comes great responsibility. Awareness and freedom are always available. Are we ready to take their gifts? Something like that. Yeah. Are we ready to take the gifts of awareness and freedom, which are always available? Yep. Do we want them? Do we want the gift of awareness and freedom? That's the question, isn't it? And of course, it's a question, just to be really clear, like somebody asked me at the start, are you a teacher? And I'm like, well, for those of you who aren't familiar with the True Ratna Buddhist community, we're cautious about drawing that distinction too strongly. Yeah, we're practicing the Dharma. We're all on a path, we're all on a journey. Obviously, I'm standing here and you're listening to me. That says something about, I'm not just some random guy who walked off the street and said, hey, come and talk about something. Like, obviously, I've got some experience of that journey, of that exploration. But we're all on a journey, so we see what unfolds, don't we? We see what we find. Anyway, that's my way of saying, I'm not going to tell you what to do or what to think. It's like it's an exploration. We all explore. So, what am I going to talk about? Well, I'm going to talk about freedom, awareness, choice, and confidence. Yeah, freedom, awareness, choice, and confidence. Yep. So let's start off. I just need to check for time. Okay. So I'm going to talk for like 45 minutes, and then we'll have a bit of time for people to ask questions and see what you made of it if you want to do that. And then at some point, Ivan will tell me to stop talking because we need to go and let the next people come in. Yeah. So freedom, freedom. It's an incredibly important word in our culture, isn't it? Like often you could think, or I think, freedom is possibly the cardinal value in our culture. It's so important. It's so central to us. But then you have to unpack it a bit, don't you? So it's like one of the ways I think about it is you've got freedom to, freedom from, and freedom with. Yeah. So just to say a bit more about that, freedom to. So we've got freedom to express yourself, freedom to go where you want, do what you want. Yeah, that's an important source of freedom for us. And of course, it's worth stating, for the vast majority of people on this planet, they do not have access to that level of freedom. Yeah, most 99.99% of people on this planet are not free to do what they want to do. Yeah. It's very striking, isn't it? Quite a few years ago now, I was on a weekend retreat. A retreat, for those of you who don't know, it's kind of like this, but with less people and more meditation and less dancing. It's kind of very basic summary of what a retreat is. So I was on a retreat in India. Used to work in India with people from from the Dalit community, so that's very, very deprived. Like the UN say they're one of the most disadvantaged groups of people on this planet, and there's 300 million of them all across India. So that's a lot of people. We're doing a retreat for young people up in Bihar. Bihar is a very rough part of a rough country, and we're doing this retreat for young people, and we did not think a single young woman would come. Yeah, we did not think a single young woman would come. The reason we thought that is because Bihar is so actually objectively dangerous for young women that their parents were, out of a sense of safety and security, wouldn't let them come to this strange place. As it happens, a whole gang of kind of other young Buddhist women came with us, and they went around the villages saying, come, it'll be good, it'll be exciting, it'll be meaningful, relevant for you. So we showed up, me and my friend who was in charge, showed up, and they were like, all these young women, they were like, wow, this is amazing. Towards the end of it, so it's a weekend retreat, some meditation, some kind of talking to people. Towards the end of this retreat, this young woman came up to myself and my friend, my boss, and what did she say? She said, some of you have heard this story before, I apologise. She said, to remember, she said, thank you. She She said, thank you. All my life I have dreamed of this. All my life I've dreamed of being able to go where I want and to talk to people and for them to listen to me. Never had that before. Thank you. I'm 16 years old. My mum's pressurising me to marriage. Probably by next year I'll be married. Who knows what my husband will be like. But thank you for this opportunity. It's like, so, that's, and what was she thanking us for? She was thanking us for the opportunity to be able to wander around a field and talk to people when she wanted, how she wanted, yeah? So for that young woman, that was a unique experience so far in her life and possibly in the rest of her life, yeah? So I find that, I suppose I find that moving. And, you're sort of sitting there thinking, this is just normal, I just kind of wander around and talk to people. So, it's worth taking on board, with unprecedented levels of freedom. So that's freedom to do to do. What have we got? Freedom from. Well, the Buddhist tradition would be very clear, but freedom from is principally freedom from, freedom from hatred, freedom from greed, freedom from delusion. Yeah, that's what the Buddhist tradition is about, finding freedom from those things that, that limit our capacity, limit our lives. We'll come back to that in a bit. Freedom with, in a way, I think is the most interesting, the most mysterious. Freedom with is a freedom just with life. In a way, that's actually what Buddhism aspires to, like an open, spontaneous sense of freedom. Yeah, so freedom. Freedom's a really important central value, I'm sure, in all of our lives. But sometimes, maybe you find sometimes freedom's not entirely what it's cracked up to be, is it? Like sometimes we want to be free, but it can be a bit of a bind, it can be a bit of a hassle, it can be a bit of a pain in the arse, it can create difficulty, it can create tension, or it creates expectations. I suppose that's what you could most importantly say, freedom creates expectations. So I had this very interesting experience, again, a couple of years ago now. Got my friend walking across being silly. So freedom. A couple of years ago, I was in a medium-sized supermarket, and I was doing the shopping, and I had my little shopping list, and I was going around, and I was, tick, 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 like kidney beans, tinned tomatoes, looking for tomato puree. I could not find the tomato puree. You know how supermarkets, they make sense, don't they? So you kind of you go to the place where the tomato puree should be. It's like, there's the tinned tomatoes, there's the, Lloyd Grossman tomato sauce, and you're like, where's the tomato puree? I go and ask a guy, where's the tomato puree, mate? And he says, it's here. And he takes me to the place where I was standing, and he says, here it is. I can't see it. Where's the tomato puree? And then he points to it, and there's only 3 kinds of tomato puree on the shelf, and they're all the same brand. Yeah, and you have one of those moments of it's like, that is completely unsatisfying. How dare you only have 3 kinds of tomato puree? I want at least a shelf, if not a row. Do you know anyone familiar with that experience? It's like, where's the tomato puree? This is outrageous, Dear Asda, you've only got 3 brands of tomato puree in your decent-sized store. You laugh, but it's like, it's interesting in that moment. It's like, this is unacceptable. Yeah, it was unacceptable that they did not have that kind of tomato puree. Like, I'm a Buddhist teacher. I've been practicing Buddhism 15 years, and I still get grumpy when there's no tomato puree, or there's no choice. There's no choice. So what does that tell us? So, in a way, that can be the sort of a disadvantage of freedom, can't it? Like, freedom breeds expectation. We we want so much, we expect so much. Yep. So that's a little bit on freedom. We'll come back to that again in a bit. So awareness, so freedom, awareness and freedom. With great power comes great responsibility. So you could say, so freedom, or is freedom power or is it responsibility? It's kind of both, isn't it? Freedom is the power to do what we want to do, but with that comes a sense of responsibility. A responsibility for our own lives, if nothing else, the lives of others. So to say something about awareness, yeah. So how does awareness and freedom relate to each other? The talk, of course, is entitled Awareness and Freedom, but kind of you have to do freedom first, I think. So awareness, for those of you who are familiar with practicing Buddhism, you'll know that awareness, in a sense, is one of the cardinal values of Buddhism, so that can be a bit confusing. Everyone bangs on about it all the time. Yeah, this whole event is entitled Awakened Awareness. So it's like, awareness, it's a good thing. Why? What is it? What are we being aware of? And in a sense, that's probably the most important question. What are we being aware of? Yeah. What is there to be aware of? So as you've probably noticed, there's a lot of things to be aware of. So actually the most in question is, what is worth being aware of? What is it worth being aware of? Because you can be aware of, like in this moment, what are you aware of? Are you aware of my hat? Are you aware of my armband? Are you aware of my top? Are you aware of my shirt? Kind of like, is that what's worth being aware of? Because it's something to be aware of. Are you aware of my voice? Are you aware of the tone, of my accent, of the words, of what I'm trying to say? Are you aware of what those words are evoking within you? So much to be aware of. So much to be aware of. You're aware of the other people. You're aware of the fact that it's like, God, it'd be really nice if it was a bit sunnier, wouldn't it? It's like, wouldn't that be nice, actually? There's so many things to be aware of. So, of course, the question there is, there's so many things to be aware of. What's worth paying attention to? Yeah, what's worth paying attention to? That's, I would say that's the central question on the journey of awareness. What is it worth paying attention to? So again, just to kind of fill out the picture a bit there, the Buddhist tradition would say there's a number of things that are worth being aware of. So I'll just kind of give you a few, and you can see, and you probably only need to be, you don't need to be aware of all of them. It's probably very hard to be aware of all of them, but some of them are good. So we can be aware of our bodies, yeah? You know, like that's, in a sense, you could say part of Buddhafield's mission in life is to help people be more aware of their bodies. You know, that's why all the dancing, you know, you show up to the ritual thing, and the ritual is just people dancing around. Like, what are they doing? Being aware of their bodies, you know, becoming embodied. It's really, really useful. I would say for myself, I think I experienced, so just to contextualise, I've been practicing Buddhism for 15 years. I would say about 8 years ago, I became decisively more aware of my body, and that was a really good thing. Kind of a sense of embodiment, groundedness, feeling my feet, feeling my hands. Yeah, I would say that kind of transformed my experience of practicing Buddhism to some extent at least. So kind of invite you to be more aware of your bodies. But the Buddhist tradition also says that we can be aware of our feelings, like what our feelings is a very bad translation of this. The technical term is hedonic tone, yeah? So like what's the flavour of our experience right now? Do we like it? Do we not care? Is it uncomfortable? Yeah? That's, the Buddhist tradition says that's something else we can be aware of. We'll come back to that later, because that's, I would argue that's one of the most important things to be aware of. Buddhist tradition would say that we can be aware of our minds, yeah? We can be aware of the flow of the flow, the flavour of our minds. It says don't worry too much about being aware of any one specific thought, because that's too hard, they're too fleeting, they pass too quickly. But like the flavour of your mind, that's something really useful to be aware of. And interestingly, when the Buddha's talking about this, one of his most important teachings on meditation, he's not so bothered about what the flavour is. Yeah, so he even says, like, if is your mind contracted or is it expanded? He doesn't make a value judgment. He just says notice. Yeah, it's contracted or expanded. Notice which one it is. That's useful information. It's a bit of a relief, isn't it? Because we can go through life thinking that we should be happy all the time. The Buddha's saying you don't have to be happy. Just know what's going on. Like, obviously, it's pleasant to be happy, isn't it? If you're happy, we like it, we enjoy it. You don't have to be happy. You don't have to be happy. And then he says, so, we can be aware of our bodies, we can be aware of the feeling tone, pleasure and pain. We can be aware of the thoughts, of the colour of our thoughts. And then we can be aware of the sort of like, for what makes up our mind, in a way, this is the hardest bit of this teaching to understand. I don't feel that I understand it, kind of know it intellectually, but it's like, how do you do that? Very, very difficult. You can be aware of the for building blocks of experience, you could say, what's going on there? That, of course, is wisdom. To be aware at that level is to be wise. Great. So we can be aware of so many different things to be aware of. But so again, we come back to this thing: what is worth being aware of? Where is it worth placing our awareness? To bring that down to earth a bit, something for those of you familiar with practicing Buddhism, it can seem all a bit. It's very easy to ask yourself: is it working? Is it worth it? What's the point? Yeah, what's the point? So I don't know if anyone's ever had this experience. Like the Buddhist tradition is really, really clear. Kind of containment, simplicity is worth doing. Yeah, it says it's a good thing. So one of the ways that feeds back into our lives is you're there eating cake. It's nice cake. You want a second slice of cake. That's natural. That's what happens when you're eating cake. And the Buddhist tradition says don't have the second slice. Yeah, the Buddhist tradition says don't have the second slice. Just have the first slice. And the question you have to ask yourself is, does it matter? Does it matter? I want the second slice of cake. It will taste good. And the Buddha's saying, yeah, folks, walk away, save the second slice, eat it tomorrow. You're like, I don't want to eat it tomorrow. I want to eat it now. Yeah? Everybody familiar with that experience? Yes. Yeah. So the question is, the million-dollar question is it worth not eating the cake now? Does it make a difference? In a way, that is the question. Does it make a difference to not eat the cake now and save it for tomorrow? Because if it does, then let's not eat the cake now. If it doesn't make a difference, then let's just scoff the cake and have some more, actually. What the hell? So it's... so how do we know? In a sense, this is the power and responsibility of our lives. You know, you think that Buddhism's sexy and it's all about kind of like deep insight and reflecting on the universe. Actually, it's just asking yourself that question. It's like, am I going to have that second slice of cake right now? In a way, that makes it more human, doesn't it? It makes it more doable. It makes it more possible. You don't have to be off in some kind of airy fairy realm. It's like, am I going to do that? Yeah, so what we're talking about is choice. Yeah, we're talking about choice. Where choice comes from, what choices are worth making, and how we lead our lives. So that is that's where the power lies, that's where the responsibility lies, the choices we make in our lives. I'm going to in some ways, I'm just kind of interspersing little Buddhist teachings through this, but if that's going over your head, don't worry, it's not so important. But yeah, this issue of choice, what makes a difference? The Buddhist tradition says there's lots of different ways in which places we can make choice. Yeah, so another little teaching it has is it says what makes a difference, what determines the kind of the flavour, the current of our lives. Traditionally, Buddhism says the moment just before you die is the most important moment in your life. Personally, I don't find that a particularly helpful teaching because it's like, well, what can I do about that? It's like, well, I'm just about to die. Great. Yeah, it doesn't seem that helpful. I'm sure the Buddha had a point, but I don't. That's less helpful for me. Then the second thing he says is, what about he talks about kind of like weighty experience. So weighty experiences are those really decisive moments in our lives, which we have from time to time, don't we? Like there's the moments when we, when we're kind of like decisively and volitionally cruel to another human being. Sometimes we do that, don't we? Sometimes you can feel it. It's like that goes into you. It's like that was heavy. Yeah, that was heavy. We've all had those moments. Hopefully not that frequently, hopefully not that recently, but we all have those moments. It goes in, doesn't it? I had one, I don't know, about 7 or 8 years ago. It's very interesting, isn't it, that decisive moment when you consciously and awarely choose to harm another human being. In this case, verbally, just this, but very explicit. It's like just putting somebody down, inflicting pain on somebody else. In a sense, just because I could. Yeah, it's like he hadn't done anything. Well, he had done something to me. I was a bit pissed off with him. That's why I did it. But why did I do that? And it's like it went into me. Like I could feel that moment. I can still remember what it felt like. Yeah, I suppose, and the interesting thing here is, of course, it ties back to power. Because what did I do in that moment? I asserted power over this other being. Yeah, I asserted power over this other being. And what it did was it made him feel low and it made me feel higher for about 0.5 seconds, if that. Did anyone else notice? No. Did I kind of like... But yeah, it goes in. You feel it. Yeah. But of course also we can have these decisive moments of kindness, warmth, you know, the moment when even though you really don't want to and it's a real hassle for you, you phone up your friend who's upset and you go and see them. You know, you have that moment when even though you really don't want to do it, even though it's a real pain for you, you go a long way out of your way for somebody else because you care for them. Those moments are really significant as well. Those moments are weighty. Buddhist tradition would say that experiences in meditation, kind of like a deep experience in meditation, that can be weighty as well. But I would argue, and this does go against the Buddhist tradition, that the most important kind of experiences are the little ones, yeah, the little ones, the day-to-day, the moment-by-moment experiences in our lives, because that's where we've got some choice, that's where we've got some influence, that's where we can do something, yeah. So that's what I want to talk about, the awareness of those choices and the freedom that becoming more aware of them can bring us. Yeah, so that's, in a way, that's what this is about. But I suppose just, yeah, because just tying back, yeah, like, with great power comes great responsibility. That's what, for those of you who aren't familiar with the story of Spider-Man, that's what... Spider-Man, he's a young, messed up kid, his dad's dead, his stepdad says that to him, because they're just having like this little kind of 16-year-old argument. He's a 16-year-old, so his stepdad says to him, with great power comes great responsibility. At that very moment, Peter Parker's like, stuff you, walks off and goes and does what he wants to do. Of course, for those of you who know the story, what he does is he makes a very weighty decision, actually. He doesn't realise it at the time. This is the other interesting things about weighty decisions. He's trying to decide how fully I'm going to tell the story, not very fully. I'm a Spider-Man fan. So he goes off and he gets into this situation and basically somebody's stealing from somebody and he doesn't stop them. He could have stopped them, like in the previous movie, think of the last one which just came out, he could have just done this and stopped, just tripped over the guy who'd just stolen something, and he doesn't bother. And he feels good about himself in that moment. He has a sense of power, because the person, he's like, yeah, I can do what I want. I don't have to be helpful. I can do that. That's the short version. Watch a movie if you want the longer version. Anyway, as we all know, the decisive thing that happens next is he comes out onto the street and he finds his stepdad lying in a pool of blood because the guy he just didn't stop, just carjacked his stepdad. So there you go, that is a decisive moment in somebody's life. And of course that goes on to influence the whole unfolding of his life. And in fact, just to be kind of like weird, where does reality lie? The unfolding of millions of people's lives over decades to come, because Spider-Man's one of the enduring myths, the enduring images of our culture. So I suppose that's another point about decisions, isn't it? Sometimes we don't know if the decision we're making is big or not. Spider-Man just thinks he's just like, oh, whatever. But actually it completely affects the unfolding of the rest of his life. Just that moment. Anyway, where was I? That was a little tangent. So choice. Where does choice come from? Being aware of our choices and finding the freedom within it. That's the point, isn't it? That's where the good stuff is. So I would say there's two things that it's really important to be aware of in our lives, in our choices. I think these are the two things which are most worth being aware of, and the Buddhist tradition would agree. The first thing is the sense texture of our experience, the hedonic tone. Are things pleasurable, painful, or neutral? Yeah, that is the decisive thing to be aware of. Yeah. So just to kind of unfold that a bit more. So obviously, as we all know, pleasure, pain, and not feeling very much in the middle. Those are, well, from a kind of neurobiological, from an evolutionary point of view, those are the key signs in our lives. Those are the key determining factors. If it's pleasurable, you want it. If it's painful, get away from it. Yeah. So we've got all this kind of evolutionary business in our lives. We've been evolved. It's quite interesting neurobiological facts about this kind of stuff. The speed with which our minds identify things. You might not know this, but our minds identify threat before we know what it is. Yeah. So it's like, I find that kind of fascinating in a certain kind of way. So something's coming towards you. You've worked out whether it's harmful to you before you know what it is. In the first place, you just know threat. Get away, run, hide. Yeah. You might try and think of an example of that for you. It's probably, when somebody starts being, like if somebody starts shouting at you, at a certain extent you can't hear the words, you just know you're being shouted at. Your body's like, oh, I'm being shouted at, I don't like that. And then after that you start working out what they're saying, what they're shouting at you at. Probably, hopefully, most of us don't get shouted at very often. But yeah, so it's that, just that raw data. Is it pleasurable? Is it painful? Do we like it? Do we not like it? Do we want more of it? Do we want to get away from it? That is the decisive aspect of our experience, because that's what leads us, yeah? It's very straightforward, isn't it? If it tastes good, we want more. Cheesecake, yes please. Being shouted at, no thank you. Simple as, no question, just, repeat, yeah? So hopefully you can see why that is central to our experience of choice. Because actually, when we're dominated by pleasure and pain, to that extent, well, we're living kind of mechanical, I was going to say animal lives, or we're leading robot lives. We're just like a little robot. Put pleasure in, move towards it. Yeah, over here, put pain in, move away from it, don't want it. It's just mechanical. It's completely mechanical. That's what we can be like a lot of the time. That's okay. I was going to say that's human. It is human. But the point is that our decisive advantage is the capacity to be aware of that and make decisions. Kind of like step up, the hierarchy of needs, to use Maslow's terminology. Step up the hierarchy of needs and make different evaluations. So that takes us back to the cheesecake analogy. Or the cheesecake issue, as it were. So, it's the decisive issue of the spiritual life, for those of you who aren't familiar with it. So here you go. So in some ways it's quite simple, isn't it? There's 2 slices of cheesecake, and you've just eaten one, and your friend, partner, husband, wife, child, dog is coming back in half an hour, and what do? Yeah, there's a clear choice there, isn't there? Do you eat the second slice of cheesecake and you say, oh yeah, it all went? That's a shame, isn't it? Oh, you bet you would have really wanted some of that. Or do you leave it and let them eat it? Or do you even wait and eat it together and share in it? Wouldn't that be nice? Oh. We make a joke about it. But can you see that is... there's a level of choice there where you've got different levels of pleasure, you've got different levels of experience. So on the first level, we've just got, my sense pleasure. That's like, my sense pleasure says more cheesecake, more good. Yeah, but then you've got kind of like social awareness, caring for others, sensitivity, and you're like, oh, actually, like my good friend would enjoy that cheesecake as well. Why don't we save it for them? Why don't we share it for them? So you're kind of stepping up the layers of pleasure. Pain, pain is even more interesting than pleasure, isn't it? I would say. One of the decisive things about pain is that we live our lives thinking that we shouldn't experience it. Yeah, I would say, I think that's, in a way, I'm jumping around a bit, but I'm going to do it anyway. In a way, this is the decisive problem with being human beings. It's not just that we have this experience of pleasure and pain, it's that we have a story about what it should be like. Yeah? We think we should have pleasure, and we think we shouldn't have pain. Yeah? That, I would argue, is the principal source of pain and suffering in all of our lives. Yeah? It's the principal source of pain and suffering in all of our lives. So, that, why is this happening to me? This shouldn't happen to me. I don't want this experience. Why? Why, that kind of why me. That's just us saying, I don't want to experience pain. Human, understandable, and natural response. But it just, as we all know, it just makes it worse, doesn't it? The secular mindfulness tradition, which is sweeping our nation, basically that's it. secular mindfulness tradition is all about recognising that we experience pleasure and pain, and that we can change how we relate to that. Yeah, actually, that's what Buddhism is as well. But that's what Buddhism is as well. Funnily enough. So we experience pain, and we don't think we should be feeling it. We don't think we should be having it, and that makes it worse. Yeah, that makes it worse to be experiencing pain and to be thinking that we shouldn't have it. One of my friends, teachers, had this lovely saying. I found it really, really useful at a certain point. It's one of those ones that takes a little while to get your head around, but you're an intelligent bunch, I'm sure. So the saying is, it's got to be okay to be not okay. Yeah, it's got to be okay to be not okay. Because if it's not okay to be not okay, that is you've lost freedom, you've lost hope, you're stuck. Yeah, if it's not okay to be not okay, you're completely screwed. You're in a downward spiral, and it can't go anywhere good. Yeah. So sometimes that's a really hard thing to do. Sometimes you're not okay, and it's really not okay actually. But But somewhere inside of you, you've got to have this sense of, it's got to be okay. I remember having this kind of like, in a way, one of my decisive moments about 5 years ago. I used to work in India. I got really ill. Yeah, I was really, really ill. Just kind of like by far and away the most physical pain I've experienced in this life. Kind of burning fever, freezing cold, kind of joints, kind of cramping. It was horrific actually. It was really, really painful. I remember being on the phone to a dear friend, and I said to him, we're both ordained Buddhists. We were both working as secretaries to senior Buddhist teachers within Triratna. And I was saying to him, I've got no idea how I'm practicing Buddhism. Yeah, I've got no idea how I'm practicing Buddhism in this moment. And he said to me, hang on a sec. So you're telling me you're in the worst pain you've ever experienced in your life. You don't think you're going to die. You're not freaking out. You're not being angry and aggressive to anyone, and you're trying to be helpful. And I was like, yeah. He said, that sounds like you're doing okay. Yeah. So, yeah, good point. That was really helpful, actually, because having that sort of thing reflected back to you, in a way, that's what friends can do for us, actually, can't we? It's like, actually, you're doing okay. You're doing okay. It's a really important message, isn't it? You're doing okay. Yeah, so that's pain, thinking that it should be different than it is. In a certain kind of sense, I think you kind of change your mind, don't you? I think pleasure is actually even more problematic. The belief that we should experience pleasure all the time. I think, I think I would argue that's an endemic view in our culture. It's like this story. It's like I should be having a good time, and if I'm not, there's something wrong. In a way, I've said this before at Buddhafield. Here you are at Buddhafield. You have a wonderful, magnified, glass bowl opportunity to experience that mental state arising pretty much continuously for the next 5 days. It's like, I need to be having a good time. Where's the best time? Quick. Somebody tell me where the good time is. Should I go here? Should I go there? Should I be dancing? Should I be doing a puja? Should I be doing this? Should I just be hanging out with my friends? Should I be being on my own? Oh, it's overwhelming, isn't it? It's overwhelming. The belief that we should be experiencing pleasure consistently, continuously, this drip going into the back of our heads. Just pleasure, pleasure, pleasure. So again, as probably many of you know, they do experiments with rats around pleasure. And what they do is they give rats there's two buttons. There's the food button and there's the drugs button. Yeah, they're kind of I can't remember what the drug is, somebody else might know. And basically what rats do is they just kind of sit there just pressing the pleasure button. It's like pleasure, pleasure, some kind of drug, I don't know. And they will sit there and they will do that up until the point where they starve to death, yeah. Over there, where that statue is food and water. And they'll just sit here going pleasure, pleasure, pleasure. And they starve to death. It's an unpleasant thing to do, isn't it? Go on.
I was just going to say I heard an alternative to that experiment where they actually made a really amazing place for rats.
Yeah.
Like literally rat heaven, and did the same thing, and they actually touched the pleasure button less.
There you go.
Because it was more of the pleasure, because they were in a more comfortable, happy environment rather than just a sterile cage.
There you go. Thank you for that. So we'll come back to that in a bit, because in a way that's kind of a point. But no, good, thank you. I didn't know that one. So so the belief that we should be experiencing pleasure all the time as in a way, it's one of the dominant views in our culture, and it's one of the ones which causes a lot of pain. How does it cause pain? In a way, it's pretty obvious, isn't it? Because we think we should be experiencing pleasure, we don't, and then we think we're getting it wrong. Yeah, we think we're getting it wrong, we think there's something wrong, we think we're doing it wrong, all of those things. Yeah, and it just causes us pain, doesn't it? It just creates complexity. It makes it unpleasant. So, or the other thing that we do, of course, and this is where the kind of the sterile rat environment versus the heaven rat environment comes out. We just go for like a crap quality pleasure, which isn't really satisfying. So just to kind of give you an example of that, or what that can look like, or the consequences of that. I like playing Dungeons and Dragons, yeah. So some of us in this audience know what Dungeons and Dragons is. Some of you have got no idea. Dungeons and Dragons is like an imaginary world where you tell little stories and you be wizards and warriors and stuff like that. So I've been playing Dungeons and Dragons for the last 3 months, something like that. I've been playing on a computer with other people in America, and you tell a little story. And like I've been into Dungeons and Dragons since I was 7 years old. It's like there's this deep kind of love for Dungeons and Dragons, it's kind of like it's very deep inside of me. And it's kind of like you try and find different ways of getting, kind of working it out, experiencing it. So for the last 3 months I've been playing Dungeons and Dragons with people in America. And the other day I had this kind of, in a sense, somewhat horrible experience of, what have I been doing? So it's completely bonkers. This is completely bonkers, just to let you know. So you go online, and there's all these little. It's like Facebook threads, but it's a story set in another world. So you go online and you say, my man kind of runs across the camp and like hits the dragon with a sword, and then somebody else says, okay, my elf kind of shoots an arrow at the dragon, and that's how it rolls. So it's the point about this is it's like. This is the discomfort. So it's like I'm really committed to doing this. It's like I want to do it. It's like, in a sense, it's my main source of pleasure. Like I've got this very pleasant life, yeah? So my job is teaching people about Buddhism and having cups of coffee with them and getting them to tell me about their feelings. That's what I do for a living, yeah? So it's like, probably most of you, kind of like in corporate land, it's like, that's pretty good, actually. But nonetheless, we all want pleasure, don't we? So like what I do in my spare time for kicks is run around a little imaginary world with other people. Yep. And what is, I was telling friends earlier, the way I roll with talks is reckless self-revelation. So this is the reckless self-revelation section. But in a way, I just find it incredibly telling. So it's like, because this is pleasure, isn't it? So it's like I've got this thing, it's like I want pleasure, and particularly because I lived a very full and lovely life with a lot of very good friends and a lot of very lovely connection. So the sort of pleasure I want is I want the on my own pleasure. Like we all know, it's like, for most of you, it's probably the box set is the sort of the emotional equivalent, the box set. I'm not really into box sets, I play Dungeons and Dragons. So it's the sort of like, you go home and it's like, right, I want me time now. So where am I going with this story? Yeah, so the point is, so you start doing it, and it's like you've got this emotional investment in it being satisfying. I want it to be satisfying. God, I've spent, like the last 10 years of my life trying to find a satisfying way of playing Dungeons and Dragons whilst being a practicing Buddhist. And I just get completely fed up with getting stuck and moaning about it to my friends. So I'm like, this is it. This is going to work. So I'm kind of doing it. And what happens is slowly you just get more and more obsessed, don't you? I don't know if you know that feeling. You get more and more obsessed. So I remember saying to my girlfriend, I'm like, just one character. I'm just going to play one person. And then then I get 2, and then I get 3. And then one day she says to me, what's happening? I'm like, I've got 4 characters. And she gets really disappointed at me because I said I was going to have 1. What she doesn't know is that I got up to 7, but don't tell her. Don't, please, that's serious. Yeah, she won't watch, it's fine. Yeah. So there I am with 7, trying to get satisfaction, trying to get pleasure. Because it doesn't work, does it? The more you chase after it, the more it kind of recedes from you. But this is, in a way, this is a point of pleasure, isn't it? But we can't. It's like you don't want to acknowledge that. You can't let that in. It's like, no, I'm committed to this strategy for getting pleasure and satisfaction in my life, and acknowledging that it doesn't work is too painful. So you just do more, don't you? That's why you end up with 7 characters, because you just do it more and more and more, desperate to get enough pleasure for it to be worthwhile. And it's, in a way, it's uncomfortable, because you're like, you know, I get a bit obsessed, and I'm kind of like obsessing about it. So what happened was on Thursday, so just under a week ago, I gave a talk at the Birmingham Buddhist Centre where I was sort of talking about something not completely dissimilar to what I'm saying here. And I had one of those horrible moments where you kind of come home and you're like, I just need to stop doing this. Just need to stop doing this. And the point is because it's like that point where you acknowledge to yourself what the experience is actually like. Yeah. So this is the uncomfortable bit of Buddhism. Yeah. Buddhism never tells you to not do anything. Yeah. Buddhism will not tell you to not do anything. It will say, do what you like and notice what it's like. Notice what it's like. And that's a bit you're like, oh no. Yeah. Buddhism doesn't say don't kill people. It says, you know, see what it's like. Well, again, that needs qualifying, doesn't it? So, Buddhism says, because obviously we're always on a continuum, so Buddhism says, notice what inflicting harm on other people is like and evaluate whether you want to carry on doing it. Yeah, that's uncomfortable. Yeah. So in my case, Buddhism says to me, notice what this experience of obsessively playing Dungeons and Dragons is like. And the conclusion I had to come to is it's not satisfying. And there's a certain point of view. I don't know if you ever experienced this. It's like it's a loss. Actually, it's like I feel slightly emotionally bereft because I was like, I just want to be happy. I just want pleasure. And suddenly, I've had to acknowledge that the source of pleasure in my life isn't really working. It's like, ow, it's really painful. It's really, God, it's really upsetting. And this is, in a way, this is a point. This is where it turns, because what it turns to is freedom. Because it's so this was last Thursday, so about 5 days ago. I feel it's amazing, isn't it? I feel a genuine lightness, kind of like the weight coming off of my shoulders, because I'm not obsessed with these games anymore. It's like you have to do it every day, because everyone makes a move every day. So every day you have to go and see what's happened and make your next move. And at a certain point I'm like, I just feel really free because I don't have to go and look. You know, like otherwise I'd be up for... I was expecting after this talk to be up the field trying to get signal on my phone so I can go and see what's happened to make my next move. I don't have to do that. I'm free. I can just kind of walk out of here and go and chat and drink coffee and go to some dancing workshop. So that's good, isn't it? Fantastic. How are we doing? So what I'm trying to evoke is this pleasure and pain, our experience of pleasure and pain, and the fact that we move towards one, we push away the other. That's human, that's natural. And in a sense, what's more important than the experience of pleasure and pain is the stories we tell about what should be happening there. The stories, the expectations, yeah? So in a way, the central story is, I should be experiencing pleasure and I should not be experiencing pain. Kind of seeing that, understanding that, just acknowledging that to yourself, that is, I tell myself that story. I'm convinced actually just acknowledging that is a step towards freedom. Yeah, and this is what this is about, of course. It's about freedom. But there's more to say than that. The other thing we can do is... it's this kind of like hierarchy thing, this kind of like this gradient. So it's acknowledging, because sometimes we have these confusing experiences where, in fact, probably most of life is like this. But it's a mixture of pleasure and pain, isn't it? You know, we get some pleasure and some pain. It's really confusing. So what Buddhism's inviting us to do there is just really look at it much more openly, much more honestly. Kind of really see the flavour of our experience. So again, Buddhafield is a fantastic opportunity to have that, because this very evening you will get to some point in time and you're like, there's a part of you that wants to go home and go to bed, and there's a part of you that has fear of missing out and wants to stay up. And it's sort of like, you get kind of pulled, don't you? You get torn between these different things. There's a bit of you which is like, actually, you know what, I just want to go to bed. And there's a bit of you, but there's party, quick. So in a way, what Buddhism invites you to do is just much more fully just acknowledge the whole range of your experience. That's what awareness is teaching us to do. Awareness is teaching us to look at the whole range of our experience. Yeah? Because normally what we do is we're just very simple, good, bad, end of story. But it's like, I know what's the nuance, what's the flavour, what's the play. That's what I had to do with my Dungeons and Dragons, because part of it is pleasurable, but I had to acknowledge that there's other bits of it which are not. And at a certain point you're like, oh, actually, this isn't completely working for me. This isn't, or, you know, like it's pleasurable on one level, but there's another level which is less pleasurable. If you're wondering what I mean by that, a good example would be, so like there I am playing Dungeons and Dragons, and my friend phones me, and I don't really want to talk to him. So it's like I talk, you know, it's a sort of like, you know, that I'm busy conversation where you don't just say I'm busy, I don't want to talk to you. So he phones me up, I haven't seen him for a couple of months, and he's like, hey man, how's it going? I'm like, it's all right. What do you want? Yeah. So it's in a way, it's fairly obvious, isn't it? It's like, but well, there's a higher pleasure to be had. There's a more satisfying pleasure to be had through talking with my friend. But I don't want that. I want Dungeons and Dragons. So I get rid of him after 5 minutes. It's a bit rubbish, isn't it? Really, there you go. But that's what we do. Yeah. So, what do we do with all of this? Awareness and freedom. With great power comes great responsibility. Are we willing, are we able to take the gifts of awareness and freedom? So freedom is to lead our lives. Yeah, coming back to that, you know, we're incredibly fortunate. We've got so much freedom. We've got so much freedom. Do we make the most of it? Do we lead our lives fully? Yeah. Anyway, that's a bit of a pokey question, isn't it? Because that instantly sets you into the sort of like, oh my God, I need to be having more fun. Just leading our lives fully, it's just being alive, you know, like it's just the mystery of life. You know, are we in touch with the mystery of life? Sometimes we are, sometimes we aren't. It's fine. So that's the mystery of life. Awareness, what are we aware of? So I'm saying that we can be aware of two things. We can be aware of, what are we aware of? We can be aware of the pleasure and pain in our lives. We can particularly be aware of the colouring of our experience, the fact that nothing is either entirely pleasurable or entirely painful. That probably isn't true. There's some things which are just very pleasurable, and there's definitely some things which are just very painful. Most things are a colouring, most things are a gradient between the two. So that's the most important thing to be aware of. That's what Buddhism's teaching you. It's to be aware of that, aware of the colour, aware of the flavour of our lives, the kind of a gradient between pleasure and pain that we're experiencing. And with that awareness, we then move into being aware of the stories we tell ourselves about our experience. So yeah, and there's a few stories, you know, that central story of, I should be experiencing pleasure, I should not be experiencing pain. Yeah. I invite you, in a way, as I say, I invite you over the course of these next 5 days just to examine your experience. Just notice when you're telling yourself that story. Yeah? When you're telling yourself that story. And if you're able to whatever extent you're able to, drop it, let it go. Yeah, it's like, just, you know, you're just having your life. Here you are, you're having a nice time, you're in a field with a bunch of people. Sometimes you'll feel a bit lonely, sometimes you'll be having an amazing time. Sometimes you'll do something you're like, yeah, that was all right. Other times you'll be doing something and it's like, that was amazing, that was a kind of decisive, life-transforming experience. Yeah, the whole range. And that's okay. But, you know, Buddhism in a way is just saying, that's okay, folks. Just let yourselves have the range. Let the range be there. Because it's hard to get, isn't it? It's hard to get the extent to which this story about the fact that we should be experiencing pleasure, we should not be experiencing pain. It's hard, I don't know, it's one of those things, it's like, are you getting what I'm saying? Do you, maybe you think, yeah, that's obvious, why are you labouring the point? Or maybe you're thinking, I don't know what you're talking about. Or maybe we're somewhere in the middle and it's just right, who knows? But it's like that point where you see, I tell this story about how my life should be, and that colours my experience decisively. Yeah. So Buddhism is an invitation to see those stories, to discover those stories in ourselves and find the freedom of letting go of them. Yeah? That is what Buddhism is about. It's about these two things. It's about seeing, and they link up to each other, it's seeing the true colour of our experience, the true ratio of pleasure and pain. And it's really worth saying here, I haven't said this already, I should have said it earlier, but Buddhism is completely happy with pleasure. Buddhism loves pleasure. Buddhism's basic message in life is get better quality pleasure. Yeah, that's what Buddhism's about. It's like you get better quality pleasure. Yeah. That for me, it's like particularly somewhere like Buddhafield. That's your mission over the next 5 days. Find better quality pleasure. Yeah, just to really say that, to really reiterate it. Find better quality pleasure. Yeah. In a way, that comes back to the rat heaven story, doesn't it? Because if you're in kind of rat heaven, then you're kind of like happy, kind of wandering around, playing with these toys in a big free environment, interacting with other people, rather than just kind of pressing the kind of like synthetic pleasure button. Buddhafield is rat heaven, you know. Here we are, kind of like rat heaven. Yeah. See you at the dance workshop. There you go. Yep. It's funny, isn't it? You just lose the point. Yeah. So. Buddhism, get better quality pleasure. Get better quality pleasure. If you take nothing else away from this, see the nuance of your experience and look for better quality pleasure. Because most of the time, that's what we're doing. We're putting up with less good quality pleasure than we have to. Get better quality pleasure and explore the stories of your lives, particularly your stories in relation to pleasure and pain. Yeah, particularly your stories in relation to pleasure and pain. Unfold that, explore that, see more deeply into that. And as we do those things, that's the gift of awareness. The gift of awareness is seeing those two things. And if we do that, we will find freedom. Yeah, we will find freedom. And just to finish, to say something a little bit more about freedom, one of the decisive features of Buddhism is that its conception of freedom, its conception of pleasure has no limits. Yeah, that's why I'm a Buddhist, fundamentally. It's because Buddhism is saying there are no limits to your experience. There are no limits. There's unlimited possibility. We don't always experience it like this. Obviously, a lot of the time we experience quite strong glass ceilings, don't we? It's like there's a limit. And in some ways, actually, we can limit ourselves. This is where the great power and great responsibility. Are we willing, are we able to take the freedom, the opportunities that our lives present us with? I know that I'm not always able to, you know, I kind of feel it's that kind of like, it's safer to be a bit stuck. It's safer to be a bit stuck. It's safer to have a problem. It's funny, isn't it, how we do that? It's like, particularly for those of you who live in Buddhist circles, it's kind of like you habituate to having a problem because it gives you something to talk about to people. So it's like, oh, what's, you know, like, yeah. So like I've got it at the moment, funnily enough. So this whole kind of games story. So like I've got a nice job. I've just bought a house. I'm really settled. I'm really happy. And it's after a while of saying, oh, I'm really happy. You're kind of like, oh, I need something else to say now. So oh, where's the problem? I know. Let's have a problem over here. Yeah, problem of the games. But yeah, so. Buddhism doesn't, you know, we don't need to do that. We don't need to do that. Awareness and freedom has got no limits. As the more and more aware of our feeling, our sensations we are, the more choice we have. The more choice we have, the more freedom we find.